Welcome to the April Community IT Innovators webinar. Thank you for joining us today for a deeper dive into single sign-on, which in our opinion is rapidly becoming a security requirement in 2017. And today's webinar is really a follow-up to the March webinar that we did on security readiness. And if you happen to miss that webinar, you can find a link to the recording and slides on our website, www.communityit.com. And I encourage you to go back and check that webinar out as well. My name is Johan Hammerstrom. I'm the president and CEO of Community IT and the moderator for our webinar series. Before we begin, I'd like to just quickly tell you a little bit more about our company in case you're not familiar with us. Community IT is a 100% employee-owned company, and our team of almost 40 staff is dedicated to helping nonprofit organizations advance their missions through the effective use of technology. We're technology experts, and in fact, we were recently named the top Washington, D.C. based managed services provider, or MSP, by MSP Mentor. We will be posting the slides and recording of today's webinar on our website, YouTube channel, and SlideShare account later today or tomorrow, and we'll send a link out to you as well. And now I'm going to turn it over to our presenter, Matthew Eshelman, to introduce himself. Hey, Matt. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon. Thanks, Johan. Happy to be here to present this webinar as a follow-on to last month's webinar on security. So as Johan mentioned, my name is Matthew Eshelman. I'm the Chief Technology Officer at Community IT. Joined the company all the way back in 2000 and have stuck around ever since. So I'm really happy to be here and to share this content with you. I do invite questions, and thanks for everyone who submitted questions in advance of the webinar. Please chat them in. Johan will be monitoring the back channel, and we'll attempt to answer those questions as we go along, and then we'll also have some time at the end to do some catch up. So as Johan mentioned, this is kind of a follow-on from the last month's webinar, which was focused kind of broadly on security. And so this is a more deep dive on one of the aspects that we talked about last month. And so I think, kind of first to state the obvious, we are really in a mobile first and cloud first world. So these are some statistics from a Microsoft slide deck taken from IDC. Some of the reports, this is an IDC report from back in 2015, but it kind of mirrors our experience as well. So about 75% of network intrusions exploit weak or stolen credentials, and as we talked about during last month's webinar, we're certainly seeing a dramatic increase in the effectiveness of brute force attacks, both against kind of on-premise server infrastructure, but then also infrastructure that's hosted in the cloud. They call this viral unsanctioned IT. Maybe that's a bit strong, but I think certainly, in organizations, it is no surprise that perhaps more than 80% of employees kind of use quote unquote non-approved software as a service applications in their job. So they staff kind of just want the right tools to do their work, and those might not be the official tools that the rest of the organization uses. And then this statistic, I think 15%, only 15% of large organizations have adequate mobile security governance for process and policies. Again, I think is rings true for nonprofits, which I think have really done a great job of adopting new technology and cloud-based technologies first and foremost, but kind of the governance and management and control has not been there to kind of support the use and adoption. So we're kind of starting with this landscape where data is kind of off the local network, it's out in the cloud, and so managing that, controlling it, understanding it is really something, a challenge that many organizations face. So we're going to talk a little bit about best practices for identity management. And so this is actually a slide from the last webinar for security. And so we're really talking now very specifically around identity and access management. So now your kind of users, or the end users in your organization, are that security perimeter. And so user account control, kind of what they have access to, is very key. So everything does start with a good password policy. You'll see that in the news over and over again, for whatever security breach or whatever security threat that comes out, often the recommendations are the same. Have a good password, don't reuse it, turn on two-factor. And if you're following those basic steps, you're going to be have a much better security profile than organizations that are not doing it. So for us at Community IT, kind of our standard password policy recommendation is to have at least 8 characters, changing that password every 90 days. We're also turning on account lockout. So for organizations that have that kind of client server model, that's one of the settings we do, to try to minimize or even identify, those accounts that are being targeted for brute force attacks. And then implementing two-factor authentication for the cloud. So this is, the last item is really a bullet point that has moved from, hey, wouldn't it be great if you could, to this is really the best practice recommendation that all organizations should be moving towards. The tools that are out there to do it, and we'll talk a little bit more specifically about those solutions as part of this presentation. But yeah, so two-factor for the cloud is very easy to do. It's not expensive. It's not very complicated, and so there's a lot of good reasons to do it, and not, I would say not very many reasons to not implement two-factor. Then, in addition to having a good password policy, we're gonna, recommendation is to do single sign-on for cloud applications, and again, that's what this webinar is primarily going to be about. And I'll talk a little bit about the difference between single sign-on versus a password manager. And then we have other good practices around kind of the overall account management at your organization. So renaming admin accounts, having very complex service account passwords, making sure that we have a good accounting of all of the accounts that are active. Actually, a single sign-on can really help with that as well. And then for those remote access, like ways that you're getting into systems from outside of the office, making sure that those systems have good security controls in place. So for terminal servers, that means enabling network level authentication, putting things behind a firewall, using direct access, moving applications out to the cloud, where it's a lot easier to implement a more robust security profile. And then finally, work with security awareness training for staff. So there's a lot of great technology tools that are out there, but at the end of the day, if somebody's kind of clicking on a link, or if they're using bad practices around sharing their account password, those technical controls are relatively easily subverted, and so providing security awareness training for staff is a great way to kind of reinforce and buttress your security practices. And so that's something that we've been working on as well, and have been testing internally, is some additional security awareness training. So something that we need to do even as a managed security provider and security experts as well. So I did want to talk a little bit about just kind of some of the landscape that's out there, and the different technology solutions. So whenever we're talking about identity and access management, we're really, there's kind of 2 avenues I think that folks are familiar with. So the one that we're going to talk about today is called single sign-on, and I'll compare that with a password manager. So many folks, you may be familiar with using a password manager such as Dashlane or KeePass or 1Password. There's a lot of different ones out there where it's either a hosted web service, or maybe an application that you have running on your computer. And that application stores passwords for the various websites that you log into, and then when you go to that website, it kind of copy and pastes the credentials into the login information, and then you're able to authenticate in. So that's a little bit different than single sign-on, in that with single sign-on, you're not actually creating or storing passwords at that application. You're actually kind of using a single sign-on service to actually authenticate to a third-party application with a single set of credentials. So it's different in that you don't actually have necessarily a standalone account and password at all these different services. You're simply using a single authentication source to manage access to different applications. So I would say primarily single sign-on is really designed for the enterprise first. It's a single authentication source. So as I mentioned, single sign-on means that with that single username and credentials, you're able to access multiple third-party applications, and we'll look at some of those details as we go through the presentation. It also supports some other really nice features, and this is, I think, really handy, particularly if you are a larger organization, maybe over than 50, over 50 staff, or if you have a lot of turnover. Single sign-on services allow you to do automated provisioning, so you can create a user account one time, and then through some automated provisioning rules, you can then assign applications to that user. So you don't have to create their account in your Active Directory and then create it in Office 365 and then create it in Salesforce and Slack and Box and your HR system. You can kind of create the account once and then automatically provision it. So it can really streamline your account creation and provisioning. And then also on the flip side, whenever a user leaves, you can deprovision their account, and then that account is then access is then removed from all of those other services. And so, that is, I think, one of the challenges with SaaS and cloud-based applications is that, hey, it's really easy to get a license, to assign it, but now we have a case where, now we actually have, 85 licenses provisioned in a certain application, and we only have 35 staff because we haven't gone through a process to kind of reclaim that. So single sign-on solutions are really designed to facilitate that easy account provisioning and then also account deprovisioning. And then I think one of the tremendous benefits as it relates to security is that you have centralized reporting. So you can have a kind of, your organizational view of who's accessing what applications, how are they getting there, from what locations are those staff accessing applications. And so it gives you, a much, richer view of how and what application staff are using, as opposed to, I think we'll look at the comparison with the password managers, like, those tend to be more user-centric, and so they're great for individuals. It's great for you, for your personal use. But in terms of it from the enterprise, the organization perspective, the centralized reporting is really a tremendous benefit from a single sign-on solution. And then there's also, I think, the benefit of policy management. So, and by policy management, that can cover password complexity requirements. So again, the benefit for single sign-on is that you can have a single username and password that will get you into 10, 15, 20, 30, 50, however many cloud-based applications you have. And so then you can set a single password policy that says, we want passwords to be 12 characters long and complex, but hey, we're gonna turn on two-factor authentication, and we're not going to require that challenge if people are in the office, but if they're out of the office, well, we're going to require them to have a two-factor challenge. And so you can kind of do all of this policy management, again, from a single location, and then that policy, is applied to that user as they go around, and you don't have to, have different policies for different web-based applications. So I think that's one of the challenges that, each, kind of web service or cloud service, has kind of slightly different requirements. So, Office 365, well, maybe you can only have 16 characters, but some other application, you need to have 18 characters, and some support certain special characters and others don't. And so so being able to really streamline and simplify it so that users don't have to be kind of bombarded with managing accounts at 10 different software as a service applications. They're just, they have their network username and password, and that kind of gets them into everything that they need to as a user. And then I will note that one of the questions came in is, hey, what happens if the single sign-on vendor goes down? Like, and that is a thing to note is these single sign-on services are reliant on the vendor to provide that authentication source. Now, because that's what this vendor's job and sole purpose for doing is, they obviously invest a tremendous amount of resources into their uptime and availability, and so those systems are highly resilient and distributed, and are designed to be designed for 100% uptime. Obviously, as with anything, there are going to be problems, and blips are going to occur. But in our experience and observation and kind of looking at the marketplace, there aren't single sign-on vendors that have been out for days at a time.
Hey Matt, I'm sorry to
Yeah.
interrupt, but there's a great question. I thought now might be a good time to tackle it.
Mm-hmm.
So, and this kind of goes back to the previous slide as well. And basically, the issue is that many of the apps, and I've noticed this especially with Google Apps, allow
Hmm.
login info to be saved on the browser, and that oftentimes that's checked by default, or I think sometimes people don't even think about it and they just go ahead and check it. I've seen this a lot with sort of conference room PCs where you go to, you open up the browser and I notice that Google Apps is already logged in uh,
Hmm.
by the previous person who used that public PC. Is there any my initial thought is, the best solution to that is probably training. But I was wondering if single sign-on provides any sort of protection against that sort of issue, or if there's other ways of dealing with it aside from good user training.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a good question, and yeah, and again, I think one of these areas where the convenience and the helpfulness of various kind of websites to try to save information to make it easy to sign in the next time kind of comes into conflict with uh, the need to have good security, especially in shared computing environments. So I mean, I would say single sign-on doesn't kind of completely eliminate that case where somebody's kind of saving or caching credentials, but I would say it does reduce it quite a bit, because in most cases with single sign-on vendors, you aren't even actually presented with a username password kind of authentication challenge. That's something where you would kind of log in through the single sign-on vendor portal, and then kind of access the other applications through there. And then there are, again, different security policies that can be put into place that can help, with those, authentication challenges where, it maybe requires a new login, or you can set, policies on certain computers or certain machines to kind of always, if they're coming from this computer, always, re-challenged for an authentication. So, yeah, so I think user training is good. Maybe even if, some policies to, block the password remembering on the computer side, and then, the single sign-on vendors, are able to provide a bit more configuration in terms of how often you're forcing relogins, or if you need to have special policies for different computers in terms of how they're handled.
Great, thank you, Matt. That's really helpful.
Yep. Yeah, and appreciate the questions. And again, yeah, please keep chatting them in, and we'll answer them as we can. So again, I mentioned password manager, that is very much a user-centric view. Everybody kind of has their own. I think there are, more, enterprise, or, kind of, you can kind of buy bulk accounts, and there is kind of some central administration. But I would say in general, it's kind of fundamentally a user-centric approach in terms of managing the passwords. And again, the primary method for this is to kind of store and copy passwords. And so those are kept in an encrypted form, and then decrypted, copy and paste into the whatever application website, and then you kind of go on from there. So it's not single sign-on. You may have a single password to get into your password vault, but then you're still kind of copying and pasting passwords, and whenever you need to change a password, it can, these password managers can facilitate that in terms of maybe generating a new password. But again, that's something that you as the end user kind of need to keep track of. And so again, if you have 30, 40, 50 different websites you're logging into, each one of those has its own unique set of password requirements and aging. And so the password managers are good at helping you make that transition, but the fact still remains that you're still making those password changes at all those different applications, all those different websites, on whatever schedule they happen to define. And again, the password manager relies on the application vendor. So you're just, the password manager is just storing the passwords. It's just a vault. You're just copying and pasting. The authentication is still handled by the website itself, and not through a third-party application. So again, identity and access management, we're kind of moving, the password manager, hopefully, we're kind of have that distinction now is a user-centric approach of saying, hey, I'm this user, but I'm going to have all these different passwords, versus identity and access management with single sign-on, where you've got one common identity. So you as the user, and then you have access to all these different applications. And so it's a common identity, And from the IT perspective, it's just tremendously beneficial to have simplified management. So as the manager of an organization, you have a lot more oversight, control, reporting, and insight into the applications that you're providing to the staff and how they can access, how they can access those applications. And again, I think overall it's a much improved security approach to have that access, that centralized view for single sign-on, and the ability to add on additional policies that can help improve the security. So in terms of two-factor authentication, where you can have a consistent policy for two-factor authentication, consistent policy for passwords, and so on. So these are some examples. This is so Microsoft has incorporated single sign-on as part of their Azure Active Directory. So that's so if you have an Office 365 account, congratulations, you have an Azure Active Directory account, and you can kind of use that as the foundation to build access into other other applications, and it provides that kind of unified experience. And I'll have a screenshot a little bit later on of what that looks like. And again, we've talked about it already, but through this single sign-on enterprise application management, you can handle provisioning, you can handle collaboration with other applications, all from a centralized portal. So you don't have to, again, set up your users in your on-premise network, then set them up uniquely in all of your different cloud applications. You can centrally manage and provision users and then assign applications to them. And then the other, I think, really nice thing about the single sign-on is that then kind of on the back end, there's the ability to implement some kind of like self-service for password resets, to manage their dashboard for what applications they want to access or how they want to access them. I think that's a big bonus. I know as on our service desk, password management, password resets, is one of the top categories of support requests that we get, is just managing passwords. And so if we can empower staff and give them tools so that they're able to reset their own password, that's reduces the number of support calls to your help desk, can give people access and back into the applications that they need to do their work a lot quicker. So this is a kind of a representation graphically of how a single sign-on application process works. So this again is kind of the Microsoft view of things, and essentially this is a model that's very consistent kind of across vendors, is that in that cloud, let me see if we'll get the laser pointer out here. In the cloud here, we've got our Azure Directory Identity Protection, the Cloud App Security. So here, this is where your identity is stored and managed. From that, Microsoft is able to, and your other single sign-on vendors are able to do some more sophisticated advanced threat analytics. So they are able to, through the power of big data, all of the buzzwords that we like to use, are able to more with a higher degree of sophistication, kind of analyze, manage, track, report on, what attacks may be happening, which accounts might be compromised, which accounts are generating login requests from unusual locations. So all of that kind of is facilitated by this connection in the cloud. So, so your identity is managed here in the cloud, and then through that, through the app security, you're able to then provide access to all these different cloud applications. So that's facilitated through some common security exchange protocols, and so you can have access to Salesforce, to G Suite, to Box, to ServiceNow, to Box. All of these things are able to be integrated in the security credentials passed from your Azure Active Directory into these other cloud services. So fundamentally, you and your users are authenticating against a single directory, and then from that directory, you're being granted access to these other applications. So authentication requests essentially all get funneled through here, where kind of through the power of the cloud, they're able to be analyzed and managed and reported on, and then provided access to the different cloud-based services that are integrated into the directory here as well. So I mentioned that Microsoft has included this kind of little feature as part of the Azure Active Directory. So again, if you have kind of basic, if you have Office 365, you have an Azure Active Directory account, then that can be used to kind of extend the integration into other platforms. If you are, thinking about doing this, as with a lot of things with Microsoft, to kind of get the full features, you kind of buy up the versions. So Microsoft has included kind of a higher level of Azure Active Directory in their Enterprise Mobility Suite. And we'll look at the pricing and some features of that in another slide or two. So that gives you the ability, in addition to just have the single sign-on integration, it also gives you the ability to do password write-back. So from a password write-back perspective, that means now you can change your password from the cloud, which is a pretty big deal, especially if you have a lot of remote users. So for us at Community IT, it's a nice benefit for us because we have staff that are in the office, but primarily they're working remotely, or they travel quite a bit, and so nobody's really in the office with their computer joined to the domain. They're kind of off, working remotely and working from home or in the office and out of the office. And so through the use of Azure Active Directory as part of the Enterprise Mobility Suite, now we can reset passwords. When we're outside of the office, we can those passwords right back to our Active Directory. And then if you have a Azure Active Directory joined computer, then the password is updated there as well. So it's a pretty sophisticated process that Microsoft has built in, and so that's kind of one element of the Enterprise Mobility Suite. And then they kind of throw in some other stuff as well. They have their advanced analytics, which is more kind of on the reporting and security analysis side of things. They have Intune, which is probably worth another webinar at some point down the road, which is focused primarily on mobile device management. And I would distinguish this from, typically we get clients say, hey, we're interested in mobile device management. We want to enforce a PIN code, remotely wipe a device. And, if those are your two primary requirements, you can do that already. If you have, Office 365, that's a kind of an out-of-the-box thing that doesn't require any additional work. But if you want to do, if you want to push applications to staff, if you want to control, what folks can do with their devices, if you want to, enforce encryption and do some other things, then Intune is kind of the Microsoft way of doing device management. If all you want to do is make sure they have a PIN code, make sure you can wipe their device if it gets lost, you don't need an Intune for that. And then there's also some Azure Rights Management, which is some other encryption, and we don't see a ton of that. But so all this to say is that Azure Active Directory, the ability to do password write back is part of the Enterprise Mobility Suite. So I know it's a lot of acronyms, and we'll kind of try to simplify it here in a little bit. So again, for single sign-on options for nonprofits, I'll first off say, this is not an exhaustive list. There's a lot of other single sign-on vendors out there. For us, either the Office 365 option or Octa has been the best fit for the organizations that we worked with. There's OneLogin, there's Ping, there's a bunch of other ones out there. We're the most familiar with these two. So as I said, so Office 365, I think if you're going to look at it and going to kind of do it the best way, you should look at the EM plus S SKU. So that's something you buy from Office 365. There's nonprofit pricing available at $1.65 per user. So it's very, very affordable. That's integrated with Office 365. So it's just, kind of, you just assign users a license and kind of boom, all this stuff turns on. And there's just, thousands of native integrations. So, we just recently added a new HR system, and, that integration is already there in Office 365. So, so it's a very robust platform. And if you're, if you're a 501c3 nonprofit, you're already getting that with a discount. I think it's a good option to to consider. I think it's not as user friendly. It's not as pretty. Some of the integrations are as nice as Octa. But I think it's a very good option, and the price is right. The other option that we've worked with quite a bit is called Octa. I think Octa is actually an acronym. It means something. It's a degree of the measurement of cloud cover. So as I look outside the window, it's about 7 octas on a scale from 1 to 8. So anyway, so Octa is a degree of cloud cover, and it's also a witty name for a single sign-on vendor. Octa was founded, I think, by some Salesforce folks, and they've kind of taken that Salesforce nonprofit model, and that they have an Octa program called Octa for Good. The link is there, and maybe we can chat that out and tweet it out as well. That provides 25 free licenses to nonprofits, and that kind of covers their whole suite of products. And so single sign-on is kind of the building block around a lot of this stuff, and then on top of it, there's other things you can do, such as kind of mobile app security, multi-factor authentication, kind of all these other things kind of sit on top of the single sign-on. So anyways, with Octa, you get 25 free licenses, and it's a great platform. I think it's very easy to use. It looks nice. The support's pretty good, and it's a very powerful tool. So I think that's the benefit. The setup and integration is is pretty easy. And it's a very robust product, very good uptime, kind of one of the, kind of industry leaders in the space. If you are not a 501c3 nonprofit, if you're a 501c4, you're a socially responsible business or some other things, and kind of all you really want to do is make sure that you can have the same password and single sign-on with your local network and Office 365, then they have a one integration free license, where if you want to integrate a single other software as a service application, you can do that for free. They just have email support available, so you can kind of buy up on all these things, but that's another option to look at. So, and then if you're paying full price, these solutions are all kind of $2 to $8 per month per user, kind of depending on how many extra gizmos and whiz-bang features that you sign up for.
Matt, another question that came in that's related to this. If someone's not on Office 365, let's say they're using Google, or they still have their email in-house, or they're using another kind of third-party email provider, would you recommend Octa as definitely the right solution? Are there other solutions out there for anyone on Google Apps to consider?
I'm not as familiar with Google Apps or G Suite, but I think that you can use kind of the Google Apps OpenID as a single sign-on solution. But yeah, I mean, again, if you're not in that Microsoft world primarily, then Okta would probably be the place that I would start, because they support G Suite and then kind of all the other stuff. So yeah, so again, if you're already in Microsoft, it's kind of worth exploring that first. If for whatever reason the price is right, or you're you don't have I would say Okta. Office 365 is a little bit more complicated. It's not quite as pretty, and so if you want something really easy and that looks good, then Okta is a great choice, especially if you're in that 20-seat range where you get it for free. So the price the price is right.
Great.
Cool. So again, as I mentioned, here's the view. This is what Okta looks like. So for organizations, it's typically set up as kind of yourorganization.okta.com, and then you would have a username and password that you would log in to from there, and then from the IT administrator's perspective, what you can do is provision applications to staff and then present that and assign that to them. So here you can see this account, has a work account, and these are applications that are automatically provisioned and assigned to this user. So our user Jane logs in, and then she has access to Gmail, to GoToMeeting, to Zendesk, to Tableau. And if she clicks on this button, it's going to just pop open those applications in another browser tab, and then we'll automatically log her in. So there is no kind of copy and paste passwords or storing anything. Those applications kind of are automatically authenticated through the security assertion from Octa. So that's kind of the whiz bang magic that these applications have. And then as a user, then you can go in and actually add other tabs that can be personal. So maybe there are work applications that are centrally managed and provided to you, but then you've got some other applications that you use for work, and maybe for convenience sake you want to have them here instead of like having a separate password manager. Then you can staff can create separate tabs and add their own applications here from a list of the applications that Okta has. And again, it numbers kind of in the thousands. So basically any web-based service that you log into, there's likely an integration or pre-built integration that's already available from one of the big single sign-on providers. And again, as an admin, then you can kind of go and manage users, groups, permissions, centralized policies, kind of all this group assignment, all of that through the administration portal here. So the comparable view, this is the Office 365 view. This is the kind of the My Apps page. And again, so it looks kind of similar in that, from the single portal, you have access to all these different applications. And again, this is very web-centric primarily. So you would log in, and then from here can click, and then would automatically be taken to and authenticated through to whatever application that you provide. So this is just a little bit of the visual representation of the different groups that are there. So these are what they call tiles, and just clicking on them will then take you through and authenticate. So again, this is primarily web-based. If you are using desktop applications, there's a couple different ways to do that. So both Office 365, or both Microsoft and Okta have what they call desktop single sign-on, where you can kind of pass along your credentials from the desktop all the way through to web-based applications and desktop applications as well. So if you're using Outlook, again, you don't have to log into Outlook again. It just passes along your credentials, and you can open up Outlook on your desktop. And so that's an additional feature that you have to kind of buy and sign up and configure. But for the web-based applications, all that stuff works just out of the box. Great. So I know there were a number of questions around end user adoption. So I'll talk a little bit about kind of what we found, some lessons learned, and some things to kind of be mindful if you're thinking about embarking on this implementation for your own organization. So again, kind of it all starts with planning. So the first step is really to identify the current applications that are in use or that you want to use. So I've got a couple of different options here. So, for us and the organizations that we support, we've got a couple of different ways to kind of figure out what web-based applications folks are looking at. One is using OpenDNS. So that's a tool that we use to provide web-based security, and also kind of provide some insight into what websites folks are going to. So through OpenDNS, or Microsoft has a tool called their Cloud App Discovery. Or even looking at the firewall. A lot of the firewalls now will provide some kind of application reporting. You can get a little bit of a survey. So I think we all know the top couple of applications that folks are using, and then using these other tools to just kind of verify and monitor what else is going on can be a good way to say, to kind of understand like, hey, well, we decided that we're, moving all of our files into Box. Oh, when I go do this app discovery, I find, a third of the requests are going to Dropbox. And so again, this is a good way to understand what applications are actually being used on your network. So, identify which applications that you want to integrate and want to bring under this umbrella. I think the thing that takes a little bit of time and understanding is to review your current applications and the level of support that you have. So this is maybe one of the gotchas with single sign-on, is that while most applications include it as part of the service, some other organizations or other vendors, like, you have to be at a certain tier. So I think like Box, Slack, and Salesforce are all kind of in that case. So if you have just kind of like the basic subscription version of those applications, they don't include single sign-on. Like, you have to go up to the enterprise or business level service, which can cost more money. So that's just a good thing to just dive into, especially if you're planning a big security initiative and you're excited by the the price of Octa for your 20 users, but then you may have to upgrade Box and Slack and Salesforce and all these other things to a higher tier in order to get everything to work. So that's just a gotcha to be aware of as you're embarking on your discovery. And then I will also say, determine your level of application integration. So for most of these, the big name web applications, the single sign-on support is pretty robust and works well out of the box without a whole lot of tweaks. But what we have found is that there are certain applications that require a fair amount of back and forth or custom configuration with the vendor, and it can be a real challenge to try to like integrate those into your single sign-on environment, because it's a custom programming application for your custom CRM, or your HR system doesn't have the integration built in, and so they're gonna have to make a special configuration kind of just for you. And so that can add a lot of time and overhead into the integration if you have these solutions that don't have these integrations pre-built already. So again, determine that level of integration. And the other thing I'll mention around that is certain applications will provide great native single sign-on integration where you kind of go to the website, you kind of click single sign-on, and you're in. There are other applications where they provide the kind of a both option, like you could log in locally using their authentication system, or you could log in using single sign-on. And then there's some applications that don't support that kind of native single source, single sign-on authentication, and instead use that kind of copy and paste method. And again, Okta and Office 365 kind of support that as well, where they can do what they call kind of password capture, and then you can kind of log in with that method. But I would say that's kind of a less than ideal option. But so just kind of understand how your application is going to interact. And again, what features are you going to implement? This has been primarily focused on single sign-on, but that's kind of just one element or one service. It often does get wrapped up into some of these other acronyms, which is MFA, or multi-factor authentication. And so again, I think that's also a must-have, and it makes it easy. So with Office, you've got Microsoft Authenticator, which is a two-factor authentication source. Google has Google Authenticator. Okta can use Google Authenticator, can use some other third-party multi-factor authentication tools, and then they also have their own app. And so again, this is a great, kind of a nice free, app for your mobile device, where it can, just send you a push notification where whenever you log in, your phone buzzes, you can click approve, and then you log in. And then again, mentioning, provisioning, do you want to have desktop single sign-on? So that's the different features, and important understand the requirements for the different may not all be included in the out-of-the-box configuration. And then the other thing that just to kind of note is that this is very web-centric and geared towards the web, and it is so I think it's an important question to ask, like, how is this going to interact with our existing intranet? are we going to write some kind of little wrapper so we can embed this into our existing web page? Is it, is it okay that we have people go to one place, log into applications, and another place to, get the company calendar? Yeah, so these are just, I think some edge things to think about is like, this is really a shift. We're kind of driving people to a portal for access to applications. How do we want that to, how do we want to talk about that to our staff? I would say some nice benefits in terms of shifting now to implementation is the vendors have really great resources in terms of templates and checklists and collateral to talk to staff about, email templates, planning calendars, charts to put up around the office. So there's a lot of great resources that are available, so you don't have to reinvent the wheel. You obviously will need to tweak it for your organization's unique requirements or expectations, but pretty straightforward. What we typically do, have some pre-project notification, kind of talk to staff about why are we doing single sign-on. And I think the primary goals maybe for end users to understand are improve security. I think with all the stuff that's been in the news about security recently, it feels very real and very relevant that improving security is an organization imperative, and so this is a great way to do it. So kind of framing those conversations and kind of here's why we're going to do it, here's when we're going to do it. Again, we've done some email blasts, providing some more information. Again, a lot of the vendors will have short training videos that folks can watch, a minute, 2 minutes long. Here's what it is. Here's what you're going to see. Click on this, and to give folks an expectation of what they're about to see, and then defining dates for application cutover. So what we found, the best approach is to to take a phased approach. It's pretty easy to take the easiest application first. So as you go through your discovery process, have a laundry list of applications, and so the applications that affect everybody are obviously the ones that are probably candidates to go be migrated first. And do the easiest ones first, get some quick wins, and then you'll have the experience and understanding of how everything kind of hangs together as you maybe have to deal with some applications that require some interaction with vendor support or custom programming or some other things, but you can build off those earlier successes. I will say that in this, for switching to single sign-on, that testing is typically hard to do, particularly kind of on small scale, because you are effectively changing how you authenticate to an application. And so, for some of them, you can, I think the best way is to change it so that, you're changing the authentication source. And so that is you're either logging into the organization's web, the SaaS vendors page, or you're logging into Octa. So you got to make sure everything is kind of set up in Octa and people are enrolled there and kind of that's all working. And then you can kind of do cutovers kind of one at a time. So, and it is difficult to kind of test the transition. So you can turn it on, test it, but then you kind of have to like turn things off or revert it. So there's not great ways to kind of run systems in parallel unless you have sandbox environments and some other stuff. And so that tends to just be a little bit too much to set up for most organizations. So you'd have to do the cutovers, and the cutovers have to be kind of you're kind of invested at that point. And the other thing is, I think, plan on making tweaks. I think the lessons that we've learned is that doing a lot of planning and discovery and kind of talking about policy and procedure and how do we want things to do, and you kind of set all this stuff up, and then people start using the system and they're like, oh, well, we don't want to get multi-factor challenges here, or hey, can we change this, or can we tweak it? And so I think it's good to just kind of be prepared to make tweaks and adjust as you go along, because I think once the planning is great, but there's no substitute for actually using the the system and the software, and so that will necessitate some tweaks to how things work. And I think again, it kind of comes back to some of the ease and benefit of the single sign-on systems is that you just make a change once, and now you've changed your access control policy for 10 or 15 different applications. So that can be pretty powerful. Great. So I I think that's the wrap up of kind of the content of the slides. So I don't know, Johan, if there are other questions, I'm happy to talk about that. We do have a few minutes left before 5 o'clock, but happy to take any additional questions as they come in.
Sure. I guess one question was, is there any value to just putting a few services on single sign-on versus all of the cloud services that you're using, or what are some considerations people should keep in mind when thinking about, which services to add into the single sign-on? From you've done a great job, Matt, of going through kind of some of the gotchas, and not every service necessarily is ready for single sign-on just yet. So there's clearly some technical limitations that need to be taken into account. But are there other factors that might be worth considering?
I mean, I'll come back. I mean, I really do think, as we talked about at the very beginning, I mean, improving organizational security, I think, is a key imperative for organizations, in 2017. The dramatic rise in, credential theft to brute force attacks, like all of this stuff, means that, there are people and they're coming after you, in your, kind of your data. And so, having a well articulated and kind of well implemented kind of security framework is really key. And so I don't think there's a good reason to kind of just do some and not all applications, unless there are exorbitant costs that are too much to bear to make the integration. So I think this also, I think, goes to kind of workforce efficiency and management. Like if you can get kind of folks kind of go into the web, they log into their portal, they have access to all the applications that they use, that's going to make the organization more efficient. And so to have a lot of exceptions to that rule, then then you start to add a more complexity, because it's like, well, you can go to this Octa portal or this, your single sign-on portal for these applications, but if you're using X, Y, or Z, you have to go somewhere else, and that has a separate password policy. So I think as much as you can, it makes sense to say, hey, here are the organizational kind of apps that we use, and we're going to bring that under this umbrella so that they're easy to use, manage, administer, and kind of report on. And and if somebody uses like, the New York Times, like their New York Times account, like, well, you don't need to, manage that. But I think for most kind of organizational applications that are used to manage business, putting them in here gives you that framework to have a good password policy, make sure it has multi-factor authentication on it, make sure you have a way to like deprovision accounts if somebody leaves. So I would say it, I would put everything you can into your single sign-on portal.
Yeah, and it also, I mean, I love this slide, because I think it really, not only does it provide a security benefit to the organization, but I think it helps to make sense of the variety of cloud services that an organization is using. And back in let's say 15 years ago, you knew what applications you had access to because they were all on your desktop or they were all in your start menu. And now that everything has moved out to the cloud, I think it can be challenging, especially for new employees, to really get a sense of, well, what services, what cloud applications does my organization use? And I think single sign-on not only provides a secure and easy way to access those applications, but actually maps out the applications that are available. So it really kind of it creates a sense of organization around the cloud services, in addition to providing that security.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Okay, well, I think we're good. Thank you very much, Matt. That was a really good presentation, and I think we certainly feel very strongly that single sign-on is no longer a nice to have, but is really becoming an essential component of an organization's overall IT infrastructure, particularly in the cloud. So, want to thank everyone for joining us today, and we hope we informed you about single sign-on, but also inspired you to kind of take the next step in implementing it at your organization. And we're certainly available after the webinar to answer any additional questions you might have about single sign-on. Finally, we want to quickly mention that we have our webinar series continue in May, and we're going to be partnering with our information strategy consulting partners, Build Consulting, and Peter Miras, one of the partners at Build Consulting, will be joining us next month on Wednesday, May 17th from 4 to 5 p.m. to talk about successful nonprofit technology change, kind of talk broadly about change management as it relates to implementing new information systems. So we hope you can join us next month for that webinar, and we thank you very much for joining us today. Thank you, Matt, for your time and for this fantastic presentation.
Okay.
All right.
Thank you.
All right. Take care.